Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. With me, as always, is Mike. We are here to go through the best new comic books of the week. Mike and I kind of will go through our respective stacks. Mike, Diamond Gremlins got you a bit. I know you're caught up on some of these with me kind of running you
Well,
through, and a few that you were able to check out, like some digital stuff on everything. So we'll talk about this. The main
yes.
comic, the best comic from this week, I think we can talk about just in the context of why the book overall is working. And so we'll kind of start with our book of the week, which was Ultimate Spider-Man number 15. I think there were actually three really good comics this week, but we'll sort of start with this. This is Jonathan Hickman and a backup artist, actually, David Messina, on the comic book this week. Interesting sort of story. We've had this major event happen in Ultimate Spider-Man where Craven had Harry and Peter kidnapped. Obviously, we saw Harry Osborn die in the last issue. Peter sort of goes on the run with his family, catches up with them, notices his son has been using that other suit to kind of be like a proto Venom type fill-in for him with that AI of Peter basically running the suit. And it was a really cool father-son sort of team up of him and Peter investigating while they're on the run this mystery that's happening. It involves the Sandman. Really cool interactions. Great to see the father and son duo work out and kind of fix everything. And at the end, we get some really cool things about the Kingpin as well, and then the machinations that he's got going on with Uncle Ben and Jonah. And I think what's been really cool with Ultimate Spider-Man is it did feel a little bit, I would say, issue maybe 8 through 11. There was a little bit of a lull in the book where it kind of felt like it was doing things. But what I think that actually did is it seemed like Jonathan Hickman actually used those issues where it seemed a little quiet to build a lot of things. And now everything is rising tension, more of like a slow burn thing. But I think Ultimate Spider-Man over the last 4 or 5 months has really risen back to being the best comic of the big two. It's not at Conan's level, but I think it's the best comic of the big two. And so, in
I
addition to
would
just
totally,
discussing,
I would
go ahead, Mike.
totally agree.
Yeah,
Like right now, this early into the year, late March 2025, the top two comics are Conan and Ultimate Spider-Man. Hands down, they are pretty much head and shoulders above the rest. It'd be hard to beat any one of those books, either of those books.
yeah. No, we might have had a new contender for that arise. We'll get to that in a second, and with another book this week with Solomon Kane. But I think, yeah, like you mentioned, it's the best one of the big two. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about why we think Ultimate Spider-Man is working. And I think this issue perfectly encapsulates what's great about this book. When you do these offshoot spin-off books like Ultimate or Absolute Universe, I think the big thing that you have to do as a writer or a creative team to make it work is you have to have the book justify its existence. You can't have just, oh, it's basically the same Spider-Man, but just in a different universe. I think that kind of comes off like, why is that not just the main title? What I have really enjoyed about this book is this does seem, as much as I don't know if it was the plan, like Jonathan Hickman and them just went, that stupid decision we made 15 years ago to regress Peter and erase his marriage and ruin the character development and take him from where he was being a 30-year-old and growing and becoming more mature and revert all that to make him a lazy 20 something again. What if we never did that? And we just picked up a decade later and acted like Peter had gone on
It,
that same journey.
it is almost like that happened because, there's that gap and now Peter's like 35. And so it's like, yeah, I like the reset. The other thing I want to say about these offshoot comics like Ultimate and Absolute, um, you know, things mean something here. And I think fans get that. Like we're getting a limited universe. It has its own continuity. It's not tied down by the past. And so when Harry dies, he's dead. It's a big deal. And you don't know how long Ultimate Spider-Man's going to last. And they're not going to bring Harry back. He's
You'd
dead.
hope
He's
not.
off
You,
the
you
table.
you would certainly hope not.
It's
And I think,
finite.
yeah, if they can
And that
do,
matters to the reader,
yeah,
and for us comic fans, we're so jaded with all the deaths and the rebirths and the clones and then the resets and all that kind of stuff. You get a fresh start in this Ultimate Universe, and we've got a great creative team like Hickman and Loeb. and they're firing all cylinders like they are, you're going to get a really good story. And as a comic fan, you also know that artists and writers like change, like other people change T-shirts. You just gotta hope that it stays like it is because it's great.
You would hope it stays as a while. I mean, I think the interesting thing with this, they've done a great job with. They had Marco Cicchetto as the main artist, and then David Messina has been the backup artist. And what I will say is, I at least appreciate that it so far has only been two artists. I wish we got the same creative team every month, but if they can do with like Conan, where it's hey, a couple issues of De La Torre, a couple issues of Brathwaite, like if you can kind of have where at least you finish the story arc with the same guy. And I think Messina is a good enough artist. I mean, when I look at him drawing and that this is not like backup quality. That could be the
Oh,
main artist on a book.
it's
And I
Messina
think
drawing.
yeah, for this issue it was Messina. And I think that's the thing is as long as you can give me consistent, it doesn't have to be the same person, but as long as I know like, okay, I'm getting A or B. Not I'm getting A, B, C, D, E, F. Like, give me a couple people involved. And I think, like you said, if they can stick to this with Harry being dead and having these events matter, I do hope 150 issues of this book go, and that will be something that matters. I think that's where the Ultimate Universe and ultimately the Absolute Universe could really differentiate itself is the endless treadmill of 80 years of canon, 60 years of canon has really started to catch up because instead of having intention and foresight and really planning things out, since the 90s, since the death of Superman, it's really felt more like everything for shock value. We don't know what to do. Let's kill off the character, and they're back the same summer. Nothing really seems permanent. If these Ultimate Universe books can really stick to, hey, Harry Osborn died, Harry Osborn's dead, I think it will give us a lot of what we liked out of comic books. And it, for the most part, seems they're doing that. I think
And
the other part, go ahead, Mike.
I mean, when you're reading it, you know that Harry just died. And it's kind of like Game of Thrones. Remember Game of Thrones when everyone was watching Game
I
of
wasn't the
Thrones?
biggest fan, but I do know that had a
You
lot of
you
more like,
never
man, massive things would happen and it just stuck. Like they'd
you
kill off.
you
Yeah,
never knew. I mean, that's part of the thing that kept you coming back to the edge of your seat. Like, who's next? Is Uncle Ben gonna die next? I mean, this one left on a like Kingpin's on a
massive
tear.
cliffhanger with him and Kingpin. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that could happen. And it's not
No,
like
that like you said, it does give it that element of unpredictability where you feel like, man, some crazy things could happen. And I think that is the element that comics has to get back, and where this is bringing a lot of that back is assuming there isn't a cheap, lazy reset, and assuming it's not just a 20 issue thing. It does give you back that feel of you feel like you can't miss an issue because something might
exactly.
happen. Whereas, and I'll say I love, we'll talk about Batman here in a second, but I love Batman. I read the main title. It's a great book most of the time. I didn't like the most recent run. But I'll be honest, there's a part of me that cannot shake when I'm reading Batman now. Like, okay, he's with Catwoman. How long till y'all get rid of this? Okay, he's gonna marry Catwoman. Like, no, he's not. That's not gonna happen. You're not gonna. Alfred's dead. No, he's not. You're gonna bring him back. And I think that's the part that we miss. Is there used to be these definitive things that happen, and we're seeing even in the main universe, Marvel can't even let historical things happen anymore. I mean, we've resurrected Bucky, we've resurrected Gwen Stacy. It's like how long until Uncle Ben's back alive in the main continuity because they've run out of other characters to resurrect. And so if Ultimate Spider-Man can stick with that, I think it's giving us the core tenets that we want out of a comic. It is giving us a Peter very different starting point, but he's grown, he acts mature, he acts like a father, he has responsibilities, he gets it. And it's interesting because we're starting with a Spider-Man who actually is a bigger rookie Spider-Man than the main title, and that he basically just got his powers a year and a half ago in the comics. But it's crazy how even though everything is so different and it's a 35-year-old Peter, he feels more like Peter Parker
He
than the
really
main
does.
universe one. The main universe one, I think they associated the Parker luck and Peter having bad things happen to him with Peter's a lazy slacker and a slob
I don't
kind of thing.
recognize that Peter.
And I think this comic, it's insane how much it's different than continuity should be, yet it actually feels so much more accurate And the crazy thing is, we're seeing Ultimate Spider-Man outsell Amazing Spider-Man, and that should be. We kind of see the tone deafness with Marvel of them being like, nah, we still don't see that as evidence that people want him to mature like that. We still don't see that as evidence that he wants to be with that we should have him with Mary Jane. And I know there's people who are tired of the Mary Jane thing. I'm not saying the main continuity needs to get him married to Mary Jane. I think you probably should, but at the very least, give him a sourceable alternative. But this permanently single slacker unemployed Peter that they have run with since 2006, 2007, it just doesn't work. He's not a. I think the thing is, we like these characters to feel like, yes, they have struggles, but at the end, if I want to see a person who's struggling to get a job, can't keep a girlfriend, is always late on his bills, I can relive my 20s in my memories
Yeah,
and deal with that. And I think
exactly.
that's the problem with this is it's not even something where you can say they're writing to appeal to younger audiences because they've gone all in on Miles. And so Peter's kind of in the main universe just a character with no tether. And when you starkly contrast that to what they're doing here, where it builds and he's a dad and he's married and he's showing responsibility and growing, it's just a huge contrast that really, really works in this book's favor.
And I think if you looked at it from a sales perspective, I mean, granted, you have a huge regular audience for any title that has Spider-Man on it. But don't confuse yourself if you're, the head of Marvel, that group is your that those good sales numbers are good because you have loyalty in these people, and what you need to do is attract new business. And a title like the main title of Spider-Man should be selling huge numbers. And some months it
Ultimate
does.
Spider-Man should not be selling more than Amazing Spider-Man.
That's
And that's
and you touched on that, and it's like it should be an offshoot. But if Ultimate is any indication of the audience that you could capture and beyond, if you revamp this character and wrote it correctly, you could have those sales monthly for your main titles and more. So this is a great trial run, and really, I wish they would absorb and see why it is the way it is and why it is doing so well because
well,
it's
and
an awesome book.
it's ultimately the power of the creative teams. And this is where me and you have talked about this. They're putting so many books out each month that whether you want to build guys up or not, the way comics used to work, right? You'd have a writer who was up and coming, and they'd put them on a lower tier book like Nova or Captain Marvel or whatever. And if that guy's run really worked there, then they typically would get promoted to an X-Men book. Maybe not the main one, but like,
Yeah.
hey, an X-Men book. And if they did well, then maybe they get the main X-Men book or Spider-Man after that. It kind of feels now like it's almost more like you've written a lot of comics. You want to write Spider-Man? And the reason Ultimate Spider-Man I think is so good and Amazing Spider-Man has struggled, it's Jonathan Hickman. It's geez, this guy who wrote a great Avengers run that's turning into a multi-million-dollar movie they're making now, and a great Fantastic Four run, and wrote these comics that people have collected. Geez, he can write a good creative yarn that people care
Who would
about.
have thought?
And
Yeah.
that's the thing is Marvel and DC, I think, they're wasting so much money on these books that last
And,
5 issues, 10 issues, 12
and
issues.
to be
Invest in
fair,
some of these heavy hitters, man, and just get them on your main books.
these up and coming writers, they learned on those smaller books. And if
Yeah,
you're not giving your talent a chance to learn and grow, I mean, I remember when I got to meet Dennis Cowan last summer at a convention, and he used to write a backup story for the Flash,
yeah.
Firestorm. And I just saw the look in his eyes when I brought that comic and started talking to him about it. And he took a few minutes with me and my family and got pictures with all of us. But he went down memory lane how he was an up and coming artist in the 80s and how much it meant to him to he would take, his pages in, and I'm sure it's the same with writers, and he would get critiqued by the greats and he would go
Mhm.
back and do better and better, and now he's a legend. But there was that kind of apprenticeship and that step by step process that they went through. And I just don't think that they're being given an opportunity to, sharpen their fangs and their teeth on other stuff before they get to the big leagues.
Yeah. No, they got to figure something out, a way to get these more established teams. Because another great example, and that, I mean, obviously, Ultimate Spider-Man's our book of the week. For me, second great book this week was Batman 158. The main cover is here with Jim Loeb or Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee on art. And
Oh,
when you look at this, it's a sequel to Hush, which, I don't know about how I feel necessarily about making a sequel to a book that's over 15 years old. But you instantly, from that, this was the best Batman mainline comic book probably since the New 52 ended with Scott Snyder. So we're talking almost a
it
decade.
sold out everywhere. It sold out everywhere.
And they had a million covers of it, and there's so, but it's just everything looks great. The art from Jim Lee is so good in the book. He's a guy born to draw Batman. It's a
Yes.
great building plot. Jeff Loeb's a guy born to write Batman. And again, it picks up, it puts all the familiar pieces. There's a cool little building plot. I think it's 6 issues we're getting here, and then it's going to break for a bit and have another 6 issues after that, I believe. But what made me so mad about this book, it's a great title. I would recommend it if you've been out on Batman in a while, pick this up. Here's where this is so disappointing, though. Both of these gentlemen have still worked in comic books for a really long time. And Jim Lee, I know he has a job at DC that is allegedly very important in running the thing.
Yeah,
But to me, this is DC has been circling the drain for a very long time. Jim Lee works at DC. So this is not some sort of, the artist, he's not employed with them, or he just does covers, or Alex Ross is under contract with Marvel. Like Jim Lee at any time could have went, you know what, I'm gonna draw DC Comics. And it would have resurrected the sales on almost any title. And so there's a part of me that looks at this. It's sort of like if prime Michael Jordan owned a basketball team and it was like, geez, the most successful thing I could do would be to go play, but just decided not to. And that's the weirdest thing. Is it's not like the Jordan Wizards thing where he was 40 because he did that, but like imagine him in his prime, in his early 30s when he could still dominate, going out there. And that's the weirdest thing with Jim Lee is like, you are a certified 100%. Any book you're on is pretty much going to sell out. And with the way comics are delayed and the way they're structured, Jim Lee could draw one issue a year for a couple of years and let it build because I want to say it's been 6 or 7 years since Jim Lee did interior art on a book. And so it's just so weird to see DC Comics have this guy available. You know the impact it'll have on sales. You have Jeff Loeb who's available. He's writing 2 Batman books right now. Why you'd have some of these guys who are out there who are still willing to do the work. And while the industry has really been in trouble not using them, I mean, I just read this. It's like, geez, Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee can write a good Batman yarn. Geez, who could have ever seen that come? It's just, it's so frustrating to have that happen, especially with the state DC's been in.
Let's go down memory lane for a minute in history, where this happened before with DC Comics in 1967, when they made Carmine Infantino the art director, and then he became the publisher, I think in 1970. He really stopped drawing comics for a long time. And that was unfortunate because he was at his peak, right? Jim Lee is in a similar situation, if not identical. But the comic book industry is struggling quite a bit more than it was in 67. Well, DC was in trouble in 67 anyways. But anyway, they promoted Carmine to help things. Jim Lee undoubtedly has a very stressful corporate job. I bet if you asked him, he'd rather be drawing comics because that's how he loves that. But he's, the captain of the ship right now, and he probably doesn't have time to draw comics. And that's the way it was for Carmine too back in the day. So I think we have to go back to the talent pool thing.
It just feels like maybe someone higher up than Jim Lee at DC should have made the decision that, like, look, Jim, you're steering the ship.
Yeah.
And the ship has flipped over and is on fire.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to get anybody else to do this job.
Yeah.
And you go back to drawing comics, and maybe that will make the ship no longer flipped over on fire. And
Maybe.
I, I think that's the thing is it's just Jim Lee I will say I think Jim Lee's the greatest comic book artist of the modern age. Certainly, I can't give him over Kirby, obviously, but of my lifetime, right? If there was a book on the stands, I wasn't around when Jack was writing monthly books or
Yeah.
drawing monthly books. In my lifetime, the one artist guaranteed 100%, if he's on a title, I'm picking it up, is Jim Lee. I
Yeah.
can't stand the concept of the Suicide Squad. I bought 10 or 12 really bad Suicide Squad issues because Jim Lee was on art. Like
Yeah.
he is a guy who can do that. And so I think that they've got to find a way that you cannot have a talent like him in an industry that's struggling who can still draw really well. Because the thing is, even if Jim Lee mails it in, it's better than 95% of the art that's available, period. It was a good comic. I would definitely recommend if folks want kind of a refreshed point of Batman. This does pick up from very much recognizable Batman elements. You don't have to know the past 10 years of continuity.
Right.
It was really encouraging to see. And it was just great to have the main Batman title be a book that I was excited to read and it was good because the end of the Zdarsky run really drove that into the ground. Last great book we'll talk about for the week. Mike, I know I kind of walked you through and showed you a lot of panels and you got a chance to read some of it. Solomon Kane. And
They
this
were
is
out of
again
it. I didn't get it in time.
Titan
Ah,
Comics. Patrick Zurcher is the artist and writer on this. He did the backup stories that were great in Savage Sword.
they were
And
so good too.
I think, we get colored now, but like just overall, I mean, that just fits so well with what they're doing. And it's a great story to start. It's only a 4 issue mini. That's the only surprisingly sad thing with it. But I do think it's kind of smart to start with that, see if it's successful and grows. And they do a cool letters page in the back, basically, of hey, they address that. Like, look, if this sells well, we'd love to keep it going. What I have to give Titan credit for with Solomon Kane is this is not just Conan with this character. It feels like him. He's a privateer. It's a more of a personal thing. He's got a way different honor code. He acts massively different. The art is different than Conan. It's less visceral and brutal, but still really fits for the world that Robert E. Howard created, and fits for Solomon Kane. And this had a lot of good action. There's a lot of plot development. I will say there's a little bit heavy on the exposition, but I think I do give them credit in that if you're going to set up a character that not a ton of people know, I do think it's
Hey,
important to sort of people drop him into that world. And so it
I'm
was
a
a
fan
great
of
comic.
exposition. I like the wordier stuff from time to time.
No, and I think where this works is it just goes to show like Titan is taking the whole Howard universe seriously. And they address that in the back of we just love this universe he created. And I would definitely recommend for folks if you want a fresh start, if you've loved Conan, if you want a fresh starting out point, I think it's good. I think it's also a great way that they've used Conan. Conan's been really successful for them. They did that Battle of the Blackstone event. They started Solomon Kane there. Savage Sword's been doing well for them. They had this artist and writer start there. It's a great plan, and you can tell there was a lot of planning and foresight to it of what they were doing. And that again, that's all we're looking for out of the big two as well is how about instead of just launching a book with a character that's probably doomed to fail, what if you did some build up and backup stories, things like that, and then use it as a springboard?
The other thing that we haven't touched on in a while, but we talked about, a year or more ago, is you look at Ghost Machine and you look at Titan. Neither one of those companies have a bad book. They're all in on all their books and they have a finite talent pool. They use them correctly. They get this stuff, put out. It's beautiful. It's well written. It's well packaged. It's well presented, but it's fewer titles. So, we postulated the question like maybe the big two could, scrunch down to a few titles. Hey, if you don't have a really big talent pool, just do the best you can with the best you got.
Yeah, I think if Marvel would shrink down to 25, 26 titles a month and DC would go down to like 10 or 15, we'd get better work. I think that's like you pointed out with Ghost Machine and them, everything seems to be kind of curated and selected. And it feels like when they put these books together, they're giving it a chance to succeed. Whereas Marvel and DC, there is almost a feel of like, shoot, we need 40 books this month. Who's available to write random X-Men spinoff number 9? Right. And it's like when you do that, there is something as, lost by association. And I think that's the thing is like X-Men lost me as a fan because while I liked a couple of the titles, there were so many bad ones out there that it just diminished the entire universe of X-Men comics. Where it's like if instead it had just been three solidly written titles, you might increase the
And not
sales
only
on
that,
those three.
the one good title, you'd have to read four bad stories because they tried to tie it in. And it's
So
like,
many
I'm
crossovers
not
and
shelling out $20 a month for that.
yeah,
No.
I think
Just give
they
me one
could
good
take
book.
something. They don't need to go to six titles like Ghost Machine or four titles like Titan, but you could go down to 8 to 10 and it might work. So those were the best three books this week. Would recommend Ultimate Spider-Man 15, Batman 158, Solomon Kane #1. A couple others I'll just run through real fastly here, give some quick hit thoughts on them. Ultimate Wolverine #3. Chris Condon's on the writing on this. I will say I think this is actually still a pretty good book. The art is really good from Alessandro Cappuccio in the comic book.
Ah,
He draws a really cool Wolverine. I would love to see him when this 12 issue one is done, just become the main Wolverine artist because he draws Wolverine very, very well. Continues to show this different world of different X-Men characters that who know Logan and he's kind of hunting them. I hope the whole 12 issues is not him just hunting his old teammates. I get where that's kind of interesting. I would say it's still a good book. This book is still, if I was doing a top 10 list for the year, this would be probably in the bottom half of that list, like 7, 8, or 9. But it's still a good book. It's got some cool action scenes. And I will say it is just cool to see Wolverine be menacing again and not the friendly neighborhood Wolverine that we're getting in the main titles. So I thought that was really good. I would recommend if you've liked those two, or if you want a Wolverine with a little bit more edge to it, set in that Ultimate Universe, that's pretty good. Um, I almost was done with Absolute Wonder Woman, but I will say the sixth issue that came out this week actually renewed a lot of my interest in this. The art, I think this is supposed to be a backup artist. This is significantly better than what we were getting
wow.
from the first few issues. And it does explain a lot of the backstories of where, her powers came from and has her dealing with Hades and different Greek mythology elements. And I think this is actually really a good direction for this to go. And that the first issue, they tried to put her in the civilian world. And I understand that's a huge appeal of Wonder Woman. It just never really hit. I think this thing of her dealing with, these different gods like Hades and Pegasus and dealing with deities and mythologies. I Wonder Woman, that is the area that I think she should reside in. And so I would
Yes.
like to see. There's a game, God of War, a couple years that has been around for a long time, where it's more just. I think that's a much more interesting direction to go. And then maybe you have offshoots where she hangs out in Man's World, but I think this felt so much more interesting. It was so much better drawn. I will say I really actually this was the first one since the first issue I actually genuinely enjoyed. Again, it's teetering, could fall off, but I thought that was pretty good. Other ones I'll mention real fast. I don't know what Absolute Martian Manhunter #1 was supposed to be. I will say it's really colorful. I mean, it's
I was
really,
I was
really
hoping.
colorful.
It
It
looks
is
like a Peter
setting
Max painting.
it is setting up a thing where Jean doesn't know who he is, and I don't know what they're gonna do with that. He kind of knows he has powers and abilities, but he doesn't know where it came from. So it does seem like it's building a mystery. I think they've already announced this has been up to 12 issues instead of 6. It wasn't bad where I'm like done. Wasn't an impressive first. I think the thing is when you put a first issue out there, I wish there was a little
It's
bit
not a
more
hook yet.
gravitas to it, and this had
Yeah.
a little bit of a hook, but there's a difference between like a mystery and something where you're like, I don't know what I just read. And this felt a little more like a I don't know what I just read kind of thing as opposed to a mystery. I'll be in like Absolute Universe. I want it to succeed. I'm in for the first few issues with all of these books. But I will say, if I had to say, like, was that a great debut? I, you're going to like it or you're not, and you're going to be in or you're not. But I think there's going to be a lot of people who pick that up and just go, I don't know what the heck that was. Last two books that were kind of decent: Batman, The Long Halloween, The Last Halloween, #6. Jeff Loeb on this one continues to be a sequel to a classic Batman story, The Last Halloween. Still a very, very good book. This is great. It's right in alignment. I think what's really cool with this, The Long Halloween and Dark Victory are two of the better Batman stories of all time. This does feel like a really fitting third novel kind of thing that could fit in. I also love how they're doing homages to the great Tim Sale who passed away. And so the artists who come on the book, it's a guest artist every issue. They're doing a really good job of their own style, but you can tell they're inspired and trying to draw in the style that he did. I think that's
That's
really cool.
really cool.
And I'll give them a lot of kudos on this. Is it as good as those other two? No, but I think if you just want some solid Batman adventures, this is a good one to find. Last good book of the week, and this was a surprise for me. I mainly picked this up because my little toddler is obsessed with the Red Hulk. And in case the Red Hulk sticks, I wanted to have the new comic book for him when he gets older, if that becomes like
Yeah.
his favorite character. But I've been reading them. I have to say these first two issues have actually been pretty good. Ben Percy
Oh,
and I think it's
cool.
Shaw on the art. Basically, this takes place where Doctor Doom has taken over the world, which Marvel, it's either happened or it hasn't. I don't know why half the books aren't reflecting it and half of them are. And that's another weird thing with events. Like if Doom's taken over the whole world, it shouldn't just be in 5 titles. But I will say they have him breaking out of this prison that Doctor Doom has been keeping him in. It's a jailbreak with him and Deathlock and Machine Man. It's actually really well written. It's like a prison break comic. He's sort of limited on his powers. I didn't think I would enjoy this. I actually think this is pretty good, which I would never have thought I'd be recommending people buy
All
that.
right.
But it's been pretty good.
Cool.
So I think if you just want a fun, shut your brain off, popcorn type of comic book, that's good. That was what was good for this week in comics, folks. I will tease one thing we're going to talk about this pair, but a longer video. Wolverine Revenge #5 ended. Jonathan Hickman wrote the best comic book of this week. He also wrote by far the worst. And so we'll talk about why that was just a massive, I think it's the most disappointing comic book in a decade. I was actually in for the first 3 issues and loved it. It fell apart in a way I have not seen a comic fall apart in a very long time. Um,
Oh
it
no.
just it seems like they told Greg Capullo draw cool things that you want to draw, and I'll try to make a plot out of it. It's a disorganized mess. We'll do a long deep dive into the missed opportunity that was with that book. But as always, folks, let us know what was in your stack for the week. What were you reading? What was the best comic? Whether you agree with us or disagree with us, we always enjoy seeing that down below. Thank you as always for watching. God bless you, and we'll catch you in our next video.
Thanks, everybody.